Hello, viewers, to the latest edition of It Depends podcast, where we get to talk about the recently concluded conference called KubeCon in Paris. Interestingly, Kubernetes was announced in June 2014. This year marks the 10th anniversary of Kubernetes. In November of 2015 is when the first KubeCon took place in San Francisco, and there were just about a few hundred people who attended it. The Paris edition that we just attended was the 20th anniversary of KubeCon. So lots of records were set. In fact, last year in Europe, we were in Amsterdam and it had just touched 10,000 attendee mark. This year, this conference crossed 12,000, making it the biggest KubeCon to date. So with accompanying me on this conference was my friend Roy. And I'm delighted, Roy, that you have joined us. You bring a lot of diverse coverage to what I cover, which is mostly data and analytics. But I discovered you're very deep into AI, into networking, into DevOps. So thank you so much for taking time off from your busy calendar and coming to this podcast.
Well, it's a pleasure, Sanjeev. And yes, I mean, I think, it was definitely an exciting KubeCon. And I thought, I was surprised that there were that many people this year and broke records, right? So very nice and very exciting. I mean, for me, as you point out, cloud native is just one of the elements that we cover. And I also cover the networking world and sometimes the telco world. And some of those conferences are busy and crowded like Mobile World Congress, but I think the energy at KubeCon and the diversity of capabilities and technologies, I think it's a lot more exciting somehow for whatever reason. So.
Oh, Roy, just to let our viewers know about your background, can you just give us some idea about what do you do and what's your background?
Sure, yeah, absolutely. So AvidThink is a small analyst firm. We cover what I call infrastructure technologies, which range from sort of networking to compute infrastructure to some of the software layers, all the way up to obviously Kubernetes and in OpenStack. We still do cover OpenStack. I mean, so in terms of the company, it became an independent company. We spun out of a media site called SDX Central in 2018. So been independent for the last 5 years. And everything used to be part of SDX Central, the research arm of SDX Central, which I co-founded back in 2012. And prior to that, I've done various things, including management consulting. Usually I was a VP of products or VP of marketing at various startups in the Bay Area. Started my career a long time ago at Cisco, writing ATM firmware and ATM, asynchronous transfer mode, not the other ATM. So this was back in the mid-90s, was writing firmware and networking. So yeah, it's been a very strange journey across many areas, including .com. I've done a .com.
Oh,
So,
wow. Roy,
yeah.
we haven't had a chance to talk about this aspect of your background because I used to work for Oracle in the mid-90s. And from Oracle, I got moved to, there was a massively parallel computer company called Encube.
Yes, I remember that. Yes.
Oracle video server all over.
Mm-hmm.
And ATM technology was the way we used to do it.
That's right.
So ATM was a network connection, but we needed a set-top box. So it used to cost $3,000 at that time.
Yeah,
So
no, ATM was a good technology in its time. I thought it would actually take off, but it didn't. It ended up, in well, VDSL is sort of the last bastion, and then it eventually went away. But yeah, and
56K was a very big deal. So pivoting back to KubeCon, how many KubeCons have you attended in the past?
about 5 or 6 so far across. I think LA, Chicago, a couple others. I think Detroit. We sent someone there. I wasn't there. One of our other analysts covered that one. And then I've unfortunately not been able to go to the EU once historically. It's always conflicted with something else. Like Valencia, I was so hoping to go there. I couldn't make it. I know you went, so I couldn't make it. But thank God, Paris this time, there was no conflict. So I ended up being able to go for this one. So yeah.
The funny thing is there was no conflict for Paris. These dates actually announced way in advance. In fact, we already know that in 2020, actually the North America KubeCon will take place in Salt Lake City, but we already
Yes.
know that in 2025, the conferences will be in London, in Europe, and in Atlanta.
Yeah.
And we will have the locations for 2026. But
Hmm.
I'm saying this is because these dates are decided way in advance. I signed up to attend KubeCon. I had no idea that NVIDIA GTC is going to
Yeah.
come barrel
I know. I know. I
the,
know.
the town exactly the same week.
I know. I know. I had the same conflict and I was stuck, but we have partners that help us cover the show in parallel, so at least I get visibility into what's going on here. But it's never the same when you're there in person. But there's just no way. There's just so many conferences that conflict. It's impossible, right?
Who knew that NVIDIA GTC, by the way, has been going on for ages?
Yeah.
Would this year become the place,
Oh
the
yeah.
calling the Woodstock of AI? So, but
That's what they're calling it. And I think, these things come and go. And I've been attending GTC for many years because for me it's local. So it's just a drive in, right? So, but it's not, it's fun and funny to see people sort of rush in. And
yeah.
then after that, after a year or two later, they rush out. I remember DockerCon, right, in San Francisco. I would go, every year, right? And it was the big thing. And then it sort of has died down a little bit. Or OpenStack Summit, which was like the big deal for a little while, right? And then so these things come and go. But the analysts are always the same. We see the same people over and over again.
Yeah, that is the best part. The best part is the amount of networking, like you said, high energy. People
Yes.
are excited. And in fact, let's talk about what were some of your
Mhm.
biggest learnings from KubeCon this year.
Yeah, so a couple of takeaways. I think, I'll just run through a couple very briefly. I think, for me, AI ML was everywhere. We knew that, expected that going in. It was literally everywhere, right? Whether AI ML for help use for managing, troubleshooting, configuring, Kubernetes, or Kubernetes as a foundation for pre-training AI models or running inferencing, right? And so it was very clear that CNCF wanted us to associate very closely AI, ML, especially Gen AI, with Kubernetes and cloud native, right? Because like, oh, look, Mistral is here. Oh, look, Ollama, right? So it was very clear they wanted that association very tight. And that was evident to me. The other one I thought was nice was Edge and WASM, WebAssembly, which is, I think, starting to take off. I think I'm seeing a lot more life into it. I've been tracking it since the early days when WebAssembly was just the third browser language supported. And I thought it had promise. I think it's starting to break out, but it's still early, right? So companies like Fermyon, Cosmonic, Second State and others, I thought that was pretty cool to see what they're doing. And early adopters like Zeiss and Orange and Vodafone are now actually using WASM, right, at the edge and using, in some cases, K3S, KubeEdge, right, different technologies there. So I like that one. And then the other ones, I would say probably not so much surprise, sort of follow on from Chicago, right? Security, observability, eBPF, continues to be there, right? Seeing OTel, right? Seeing security in terms of SBOM, right? These, sort of the software bill of materials, projects like Notary, Sixstore in terms of that whole chain of trust, from the very beginning of software all the way to the delivery. So I think security observability is not going to go away. And then finally, GitOps workflows. Yeah, sure. Right. Flux, Argo CD. Right. And then around that, also Dagger from Solomon Hykes, the creator of Docker, around that whole sort of CI/CD improvement and maturation. And then last two things I would say, platform engineering becoming a thing, sort of this service mentality. And then FinOps and cost management. Again, when someone like AWS keeps repeating the save money, FinOps, that means it's a thing. Enterprises do care about the amount of money they're spending, right? Whether it's Kubernetes in-house private cloud, oh, it's public cloud, it is a thing. So I would say those are the sort of key takeaways for me across the board. I don't know, do you agree? What did you see?
I completely agree with a lot of things you said. In fact, your coverage is much wider than mine. I was delighted actually that AI was such a big part of this conference because that is one of my key areas. So data analytics and AI, I don't cover as much some of the observability. I cover data observability, but not the overall observability.
Hotel here. Yep.
GitOps. So some of those are not. So thank you for giving a very, very good broad coverage. So I thought on day one, the talk was all about how Kubernetes wants to be the control plane for AI. But when we day two, which is a more technical day, and right from get-go when the keynote took place, I was surprised it was back to platform engineering.
Yeah.
I heard, two prominent people actually talk to us in a room and say AI is boring. Platform engineering is where the fun is. And I think it just shows a state of mind. So I felt that the crowd in KubeCon was really struggling with how deep to go into AI and how much to maintain their focus on platform engineering. Found that very interesting. WASM, actually, I've looked into WASM a bit in the past, and I've actually been on a couple of podcasts with Fermyon.
Yeah.
But I'm just curious to hear what is Orange and Zeiss doing with WASM. It'll be great to see what is the business application of WASM, because some people who are watching this may not even know what WASM is, or WebAssembly. So can you throw some light on what are
Sure.
they doing?
Yeah, so WebAssembly is a sort of an intermediate format that comes with it's I think the best way to describe it is it's kind of like, when we had Java from a long time ago and we had a JVM, Java Virtual Machine, and it was at the sort of write once coding, write once, run anywhere dream that I think, the best way to describe WASM is sort of the evolution of that. So WASM is an intermediate format that essentially describes a sort of a virtual machine, and sort of the bytecode format. And you can take multiple languages. So it's polyglot. So it'll take multiple languages, Rust, C, C++, and you can compile it into WASM. So multiple languages target WASM. And then once you have that, then you can run it anywhere there's a WASM runtime that's supported, including the browser. So you can run it in the browser, which is the original home of it, right? Mozilla sort of created that. But there's also other runtimes now. And now what we're seeing, at least in the early days, is that WASM is being used for running edge workloads and for OT sort of IoT type workloads, on premises. And so the thought here is that because WASM has sandboxing, so it's got protection, it's got multiple language support, it's got fast startup times, and it's got a lot of these security controls. So you can control what APIs are allowed and not allowed, and the behavior of that. And so those properties make them ideal for sort of targets that are at the edge, right? And so we're seeing that. And so Zeiss was more of a sort of a running, again, edge workloads. There was another machine matters or machine metrics, like I'll have to find out the name. I saw the session. Again, running in sort of an IT, OT workload, right? IoT workload type thing. For the carriers, the interest in WASM, again, is sort of for edge workloads. And once again, it's that run anywhere, highly portable, multi-language, polyglot support, highly secure, fast startup time, that for the carriers say, hey, if I could write my network functions and compile it into WASM, then I could run it at the customer edge equipment. I could run it at my carrier edge. I could run it in my data centers. And once I built it, I have that portability and that flexibility of running the workload sort of anywhere. And now with inferencing, right, companies like, say, Fermyon is saying, look, I can give you sort of serverless inferencing, right? I'll sort of preload the models for you in these different runtime locations, and you just write a simple function and run inferencing against some whatever LLMs or small LLMs, whatever you're going to call those, in the right places. And you don't have to write complex code. You just write the simple logic, the business logic, and it will make sure that we run it for you at the right time and manage resources for you in the right way. So that's the thought and the appeal of WASM. And that's why the carriers like it too. I mean, I work with carriers, and some of them, like Vodafone and Orange gave a talk actually. They actually are interested in those exact properties of WASM because they view it as a potential platform for their edge workloads.
I see. This is very interesting. I had no idea that Fermyon was now talking about inferencing, because last year that was not the case at all.
Yeah,
And in fact, I came across a number of companies that started in the infrastructure space, but then they made this complete shift in AI. One of the companies I actually stopped by to talk to these people, the company is called Acorn.
yeah, yes. Shannon and Sheng Liang. Yeah, exactly.
Right, correct. I alongside with Shannon, for instance, he and the other founders of this company were the founders of Rancher, which
That's
they
right.
home to SUSE Linux.
Yes.
And then they decided to go back into this container world.
Mm-hmm.
One day they woke up and they said, wait, why are we doing this? We should be creating this orchestrator, some sort of an ability to make function calls
Mm-hmm.
and invoke agents.
That's
So
correct.
this entire business uh, application on top of LLMs,
Yep.
these function calls to the two
Exactly.
small, very interesting.
Exactly. Yeah, like you, I was shocked. I mean, I've known Shannon and the team for some time, the Rancher team originally, and then they came out and did the Acorn, and I was like, oh, interesting. You know, the new way of orchestrating, right? Simplify orchestration, so make DevOps easier. I'm like, oh, it's pretty cool. So I tried out Acorn. I'm like, not bad, evolving. And then I saw Darren Shepherd's sort of tweet, from Acorn, right? He's like, "Oh, check out this GPT script thing," and I'm like, "Okay, sure. You know, I'll install it, try it out." I'm like, oh, not bad. So I thought it was a hobby project. And then a couple of weeks, I guess, I don't know, a couple of weeks ago, they switched. The hobby project became the main project. And then, yeah, like you, lo and behold, I'm there. I'm like, Shannon, I'm like, what's going on? And he's like, yeah, GPT script, right? So, yeah, there was a dramatic switch, right? The dramatic pivot, but I think it's probably the right thing. I think he's like, the first 2 weeks we got 2,000 stars on GitHub for GPT script, and looking at the momentum, he's like, I think that's the place to be. And I have to agree. I guess
Yeah.
it's a strange pivot, but it fulfills a need, and it's interesting. GPT script and the GPT stack, which is what they're gonna announce and release next, I think looks promising to me. I mean, I have it running on my laptop here just for fun, right? But it's really interesting. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I think what I saw mainly was what I would say Kubernetes for AI. Kubernetes becoming sort of the runtime engine for AI, for Gen AI especially. And what
Mm-hmm.
is we know how expensive it is to procure GPUs. That is, if you can even find them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
H100 especially, you can still find some older A100s. So
Mm-hmm.
because of the high cost, Kubernetes becomes a very attractive way to monitor, to give you the resources, and if they're not being used, then you sort of shut it down. So you can, because the cost is so high of GPUs that Kubernetes becomes a good way to orchestrate and provision these resources.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's that definitely, because when you do large scale, computing, whether you're doing for, sort of pre-training or really for inferencing,
Yeah.
a lot of you need something to orchestrate it. And I think it's very convenient because many, many cases, Kubernetes clusters already exist. Might as well use it. Now, there are some changes that have to be made to allow it to, be more efficient around sort of the GPU. And then there's potentially GPU virtualization down the road, especially for inferencing. But for the time being, I think they're finding that for large-scale orchestration, Kubernetes is pretty convenient to do it. It may not be always the right answer, but because it is an answer and already familiar in existence, I think that's definitely, one of the things. I think the one of the panelists, I think in our media analyst sessions, I think it was Arun from Intel made, I think an appropriate comment, which is that we shouldn't assume that Kubernetes and I think even sort of cloud native sort of the libraries and the projects are always the right answer for everything, including pre-training, and we should sort of rethink it. But I think for the time being, given that any large-scale orchestration, a lot of it falls within sort of Kubernetes clusters, probably makes a lot of sense for convenience and for familiarity to use it. And we'll see. It will probably evolve. But the next KubeCon, there'd be something else, and the next KubeCon, there'd be something else, I'm sure. Yeah.
I was actually thinking to myself, the full name of this conference is KubeCon plus
Cloud
Cloud
Native Con. Yeah,
Con.
exactly.
They
Yeah.
should change to KubeCon plus AICon. So,
You know what? The name will probably expand. You watch. The name will probably expand.
yeah, you never know,
Yeah.
with AI. So how do you see this overall ecosystem morphing or changing? And I'll give you an example of where I'll just because I mentioned platform engineering. One of the big announcements at this year's KubeCon was creation of this working group, and they came up with a bunch of white papers on what is platform engineering. I went through that, and I felt that Kubernetes has a great view of this underlying infrastructure. So they collect a lot of metadata, like open telemetry, for instance. On open telemetry, I think is one of the largest projects in CNCF. But that metadata in the concept of metadata doesn't exist in this ecosystem. Like no one talks about metadata like the way we talk about metadata in data and analytics. And I heard that there could be companies that can take this metadata that is being generated across the entire Kubernetes ecosystem and then feed it into either LLMs and make them more context rich, or use metadata for orchestration. So I just felt that there was a lack of understanding of the importance of metadata.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think in the next KubeCon, right? So I think Salt Lake and probably next year in London, you're absolutely right. I expect to see exactly what you talked about, which is taking metadata, taking telemetry coming from your clusters, and then using that for troubleshooting, for anomaly detection, capacity planning. For sure. I think that's optimization, right? So sort of FinOps or just performance optimization. Yeah. So I think that will come, and yes, LLMs will exist, and you'll see LLMs just about everywhere. So that yes,
Yeah.
I think that would be an expectation that I'm pretty sure some of them are doing it. I think you're right. I didn't see anyone on the show floor, but again, the show floor was pretty big. And given the meetings that we had, I don't think we could walk it. That's the one regret, right? I wish I could stop at every booth and talk to them at least 10 minutes, but it's just not possible. Yeah.
Well, long lines everywhere, outside
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
outside the booths.
Yeah.
And I have to say, this is a very dedicated community. I've never seen such long lines of people trying to collect stickers.
I know, I know, I know. It's grown people, right? Grown women, grown men lining up just for stickers. I'm sitting there. I'm like, look, I mean, my kids used to collect stickers when they were 4 or 5.
Yeah.
But you know what? I do have some developers as kids, and
Yeah.
they do like those stickers. I don't understand why. Maybe it's a prerequisite. If you don't like stickers, you can't do DevOps and you can't develop. Right?
Yes, I know. It's a development thing. And by the way, the stated goal of KubeCon is to improve developer experience. End of the day, that's what the focus is, developer experience.
Mhm.
And the funny thing is, developers want their resources to be available as fast as they can. And so CNCF members are there to support the developers. In the past, they have not been that close to the data scientist community because data scientists,
Yes.
they work at their own pace, and it wasn't part of this ecosystem. But
Hmm.
there's been a lot of talk about AI engineer role. And
Yes.
so any thoughts on that role?
Yeah, I think I heard a couple of times at the conference, just like, originally we had developer and then we had the operations and DevOps came up, and then we did DevSecOps and NetSecOps and DevSec, you can keep chaining it, right? You can keep pipelining that. That AI, that there is the AI ops and then the dev. I don't know where you want to fit the AI in there, but I think for AI workloads, I think they're probably going to need some data expertise, right? Some machine learning expertise to try to make the platform more amenable for those AI workloads. And there's going to be the model ops. We talked about model ops as well, right? And how do you bring in model ops? And we've had conversations with the other analysts around to know how does that evolve, right? Kubeflow is, it's sort of the beginning of that, but that will need to evolve. Like, we're seeing on the public cloud side, like AWS sort of Bedrock, right? Google, the Vertex AI, the Model Garden, Azure AI Studio, all these things that we've all sort of played with and gone in there and mucked around. There isn't a sort of an open source version of that kind of the CNCF AI Studio, right? I think that that hasn't quite formed yet. And so the AI engineer or the AI ops or the model ops or the dev model ops, I don't know what we're going to call it, dev ML ops, some name will appear, some marketing person will come up with that. But I think that role will emerge over the next 12 to 18 months. I think that's just a reality, because I think AI is an important workload, clearly, and it's going to become more important for the next 12, 18, 24 months, I mean, look at NVIDIA's stock, right? It's so clearly important.
Yeah. And AI people, unlike the data scientists, now need their resources to be brought up and down as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
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 So about some of the sessions, keynotes and all. So I liked in keynote was how NVIDIA was talking. They had quite a strong presence in spite of having their own conference the same week.
Yep.
You mentioned Mistral was on stage. So there was this move to improve the allocation of GPU resources. For example, in the past, the AI engineer would have to specify, I need 2 A100 GPUs and write a YAML file. But I saw there was something about DRA, dynamic resource. So what's going on
I think I saw a little bit of this already in like when on the telco side, when we were looking at virtual network functions. So any application or workload that requires specific hardware or capabilities or fixed resources to be available, there is this requirement that you want to place to say this workload will run, but I need the following resources or need the following capabilities. So I need the following GPU, CPU capabilities. And I think in order to be able to provide that, the underlying orchestration system needs to be able to give you that capability. And I think I saw that with VNFs, like, oh, sometimes I need a what do you call a smart NIC, right? A sort of accelerated card. Same thing. I need a GPU. And so when you schedule these workloads, when you allocate these workloads, can you please make these resources available to me so that I can run my workload appropriately? And for workload placement and workload scheduling, right, you need that sort of hints in terms of what the underlying cluster, underlying nodes, underlying ports can give you resource-wise to be able to place those workloads appropriately. So I saw a little bit of that in the what we call network function virtualization telco stuff, and I think with the GPU seeing more of that as well, right? So, but yeah, I mean, I think sort of having this dynamic resource allocation API, I think that's important. And if I remember correctly, I think NVIDIA demonstrated something. This was maybe I have to say maybe late last year. I'll check it out, I'm sure, but I'm pretty sure that NVIDIA did a demo of DRA. That's right, they did dynamic resource for NVIDIA GPUs in Kubernetes right there. It's on GitHub. That's the project right there. So yes, yeah.
So, and the move is also to make it more declarative. Like you said, in telcos, you had to be prescriptive. These are the resources I want. So
Yes.
okay.
Yeah, it's a similar thing. It's like when I need hardware support or dedicated resources to support my workload,
Yeah.
GPU or some kind of smart NIC or whatever it is, I need the underlying cluster to, the ports to tell me what's available, what's not, and then to be able to say, to declare and say, I need these things, otherwise my workload can't run. And it's up to the scheduler and allocated to make those things available, right, for these very specialized workloads. And we're going to see more of that, I think, with more AI workloads. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So it was interesting that, Priyanka Sharma did the demo, and once again, she was using Ollama. Ollama seems to be a favorite, which allows you to run these LLMs on your desktop. And
Yeah.
there were a bunch of these double L uh, products like baklava and lava, and so that was interesting. But anyway, she had a very interesting demo. What were some of your other key takeaways from the keynotes?
I think the other thing for the keynote is, I think, sort of two or three things. I think one was the fact that I think, again, maybe slightly biased, but they said, well, not everything's going to be GPUs. A little bit self-serving, the people who were saying that, right? That CPUs can, and they are right. I mean, CPUs for inferencing workloads, CPUs can do a decent job, right? Especially for the appropriate type of models if they've been quantized, with sort of LoRa adapted, right? Yes, you can. You don't need GPUs always. So I think that was one thing that I took away, or at least they were emphasizing. The other one is that Kubernetes is going to be around for some time. Maybe not Kubernetes itself, but the model and the APIs look like they're sort of established and is the thing. And then the third one that is KubeVirt again, and I've seen KubeVirt over the years many times now, which is the ability to run a VM inside a container, right? And so that was supposed to, I think, so I would say that in terms of KubeVirt, so the VMs trying to be killed, I think it's still an ongoing process. We're not quite there yet. And then finally, the other thing that hit me was sustainability with Kepler and being energy aware to see what your workloads are doing. I think that was some of the other things that I took away from the other keynotes.
And that's great.
Yeah.
I also want to talk to you about open source. And the reason I mention open source is because while we were at the conference, Redis,
Yes.
their open source license
Yes.
and became SSPL, just like MongoDB had become a few years ago. And I
That's
know
correct.
some repercussions even at this conference because HashiCorp,
BSL. Yeah.
Terraform. So what's going on in that space?
Yeah, I think there's a reaction. I think open source is cool, was cool, and I think it was viewed as a way to get credibility with the end users, a way to attract end users to use your product when you were a no-name startup. It was also a way to attract developers who like working on open source because it's, number one, it maybe aligns with the ethos. Number two, allows them to demonstrate the capabilities out in the open, and so they like that for the career, right? So I think that's been a good thing. I think what everyone is realizing is that making money off pure open source can be difficult. I mean, there's Red Hat, there's Canonical, right? There's SUSE and a couple of others, but historically it's been a challenge. And the service providers, I use it in a general sense, service providers, the cloud service providers who are able to leverage those open source and sell managed services turn out to be able to make good profits. And I think if you are the creator and provider and maintainer of the open source, you're saying, hey, no fair, right? I put all these efforts in and someone else is monetizing it. And so I think that's sort of driving them back into the, wait a minute, you're using my software to compete with me? Not nice, right? So they're looking to put a stop to that. And that, I think once you go down that, it's a slippery slope. It's very hard to maintain that sort of high moral ground, right? It's very difficult. And so, I mean, Redis just did it, as you point out. MongoDB did it many years ago, and with HashiCorp's recent BSL move, right? Yeah, and it's now spawned OpenTofu, which was a big thing at KubeCon, right? The replacement for Terraform, because everyone uses Terraform And the HashiCorp BSL is a little ambiguous in some cases, so people are worried, so they rather go open source.
Mm.
And I think, same thing with HashiCorp Vault, open BAO, right? So so I think it's kind of unfortunate in some sense, but it's the reality. And so I'm not sure what it means for open source in the longer term, right? I hope it continues somehow, but I do understand that many of these companies need to make money, and hyperscalers are playing nicer, I guess, but they haven't always played nice, right? So
Yeah. So my feeling, I know these companies need to make money. How long can they keep, going on, just building stuff, and then hyperscalers come and they grab the market share and their dollars.
mhm.
But I feel that, it seems to be death by a thousand cuts.
Yeah,
Slowly we
yeah.
see open source is chipping away, going away, and it's
Yeah,
important.
it's unfortunate. It is unfortunate. I mean, I'm a huge supporter of open source. I've been had that mindset for the last, I don't know, 3 decades now. And I mean, I'm a beneficiary of open source, for many, many years. And I don't know what's going to happen in the future, right? I don't know for my kids that they become developers or DevOps, what does it mean for them? I actually don't know.
Yeah,
I actually don't know.
we had a vigorous chat at dinner one day, talking about all this excitement with open source models.
Yeah.
There, because if you get a GPT-4, it's you just use it. It's amazing. Uh,
Hmm.
Not much you can do with it. But if you get a Llama 3 or a Mistral 7B or something like that, this you can fine tune it, you can play
Yeah.
around, change the weights, right? So
Yep.
you're doing
Yes.
groundwork on that.
It's important, and it's important. I think, open source is very important to the development and training of the next generation of developers. And I guess in the AI sense, it'd be the next generation of sort of AI scientists or AI engineers, right? And without that open nature of it, you can't give them toy systems because that's not the learning. These are actual open source, large scale production systems. And I think over the last 2 decades or 3 decades, I think open source has benefited the developer community and computer science tremendously just by the ability to share, to learn, to watch, to borrow, to adapt, right, to use. I think that has driven a lot of innovations. And if that were to go away, I don't know what that means, though. I hope there is a balance, right? I hope we find a way.
Yeah, what I see is that large companies like Meta are going to keep carrying on because they've got so much money. But
Yeah.
small companies, even Mistral, Mistral is extremely well funded. But what if that money starts dwindling because they're paying these huge GPU bills and now they need to make money? So what happens to all the open source models? So
Yeah.
anything like that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's hard. It's always hard to be the good guy and play by the rules and give freely.
Yeah.
And then,
Right.
again, it's just hard. I mean, we've seen that, right? So, yeah.
So let's talk about customers. So you already
Mhm.
mentioned Orange and Zeiss. What other customers did you get to see, and
Mm.
any stuff you can share?
Yeah, so I saw a couple of things here and there. Again, couldn't attend all the sessions. I thought I saw sort of I think there was a presentation, remember Goldman Sachs was migrating VMs to Kubernetes and KubeVirt, right? So there's all these benefits and challenges. Roche, the pharmaceutical, was using Cilium and eBPF to control access across multi-region clusters and
Mm.
with through Cloudflare. And I thought that was kind of an interesting use case, but clearly, Cilium is getting some traction, and obviously eBPF is getting a lot of traction. I think Bloomberg on Argo Day had a presentation of scaling to 10,000 workflows per week with Argo and GitOps. I thought clearly it's at scale, right? Even in-house, right? At scale. And then I think the other one was it was Deutsche Bahn, the railway, the German railway, right? They were looking at this was the case of using Kepler to look at the ecological impact, of cloud applications, right? Using the telemetry and using Kepler to try to manage that. And I thought that was interesting. I don't know if all the companies are going to care about that, but probably we all should, sustainability, right? And I think some of those were actually, I thought, quite interesting. I wish I had time to go check out more, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I was surprised. I was talking to people from Intuit. One
Mm,
big coverage for me is a topic called data products. So when you have a lot of these business domain specific data products, then how do you deploy them, version control them, and do all of that? There are a lot of companies that exist to do that, but Intuit, because they created Argo, so their entire data products architecture is open source. It's based
yeah.
on Argo for
Mhm.
deployment. So I found that very interesting. So
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that the whole data, the whole AI stuff is going to be, I think, very interesting going forward. In fact, speaking of data and AI, met this, actually Amber introduced me to a startup called DataCebo. Maybe I think she did the same thing as well. So what DataCebo does is actually it started out as a sort of open collection of sort of synthetic data that you could use for development, right? Um, Thought it was pretty interesting using Gen AI to generate data, right? That had very specific characteristics for dev training, for dev for development and testing and all that. I thought interesting.
So my interesting takeaway, I also met with DataCebo,
Yeah.
was that you're generating synthetic data to mimic your real life data. So if your real life data is pretty bad, it's got like data quality issues, you want your synthetic data to be equally bad.
Yes. Yeah.
Wait, can you not just fix it, improve it? They're like, no, we don't want to, because then you'll be testing the wrong thing on synthetic data. And when you go into production with your real data, so we actually want to be as statistically close to your real data, including all the warts and drawbacks that you have.
Yeah, yeah. That's realism, right? I mean, that's the quality. You want to test with as realistic data as possible across whatever attributes or KPIs or whatever characteristics, right? The data has, right? Yeah. I thought that was a pretty interesting use case. I thought that was fun, actually. Yeah.
Were there things that surprised you or you didn't expect to see?
Um, what did I not expect to see? I think I was glad that not every single booth had the word AI there. So I think AI was prominent, but thank God it wasn't at every single booth. When I was over at the Mobile World Congress, MWC, just a month ago, actually, there was a lot more AI, sort of AI washing,
Hmm.
Gen AI washing in a lot more places. So I think I was actually quite happy that even though AI was prominent,
Yeah.
there wasn't sort of pure Gen AI washing like literally everywhere. And they were, let's focus on GitOps, let's focus on observability, let's focus on security. So a lot of the fundamental elements were still there. Thank God. So I was surprised it wasn't more hyped. I was happy. I think that was the case. The
Yeah.
other one I thought was interesting is that I was just talking to a friend and we both agreed that the vibe at KubeCon EU, in fact, I think KubeCon EU has a larger attendance than the KubeCon North America. I think so. I think so. But anyway, it felt like more buzz, more energy,
Yeah.
more intensity.
Right.
And I think we were both remarking that, and then we're like, yeah, it's surprising, huh? But maybe it's because a lot of North American companies depend on the hyperscalers to run their Kubernetes ecosystem, and they just use it, right? GKE, EKS, right? AKE, whatever, right? AKS. And and in Europe, maybe because of the more not sovereign nature or whatever, just whatever it is, the nature of things, many of people run more of their own infrastructure. And so they're there to learn to actually deploy and they care about large scale deployments. And that may be it. But that was the other thing that the energy was great, I thought.
I was actually surprised to find out that 51% of the attendees were coming to this conference for the first time, more than half.
Yeah.
I,
And you know what? You look back, you go ask the CNCF, that stat is repeated every year. So that
wow.
means people don't come. No, I'm kidding. People don't come back. No, I'm kidding. But it's not. It's we had I actually had a chat about that with CNCF.
Okay.
We're hypothesizing that maybe a lot of companies, they don't send the same people every year. They rotate to give people chances. And I know that. I just talked to my son who's now at Roche, and he says, yeah, people take turns to come, right? I mean, of course, if you're the speaker, you're speaker, but they give people turns to come. So I think that maybe that rotational element, maybe what's driving it. Because yeah, otherwise it's not growing that fast that 51% can be new every year, right? So yeah.
Right. For me, I felt there was very little about governance. But I felt governance is a topic that needs to be paid more attention to. So
I would agree. Yeah, I would agree.
yeah,
There was not a lot about that. There was there, but not as much as I think, yeah, you would have expected. Agreed. Agreed. That's a good observation. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Also, in the US, I've noticed in the past when KubeCon takes place, there are companies like VMware, Intuit, they send literally 100 people to this conference, like massive numbers.
Mhm.
So I think in Europe there was a lot more diversity. There are a lot of like more. It seemed like there was more representation of companies and fewer people from each individual company. So
Yes.
it was,
Yes. More diversity across the different countries, mid-sized companies, smaller companies, universities. I met a whole bunch of different people from all over the place, and
yeah.
even from Singapore, actually, who was a speaker. Yeah. So I thought that was kind of neat. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
This has been absolutely amazing. Having this sort of discussion with you on what we saw. I really want to thank you for educating the viewers from your point of view, and I'll see you hopefully in Salt Lake City.
Yeah. I look forward to the next time, Sanjeev, and thank you for the opportunity. No, I enjoyed it very much.
Likewise. Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone. See you. Bye.